Hello and welcome to a new edition of The Big Picture, the show where we try to go beyond the news and understand the larger forces at play in driving news events. Last week, the Narendra Modi government marked 100 days in office. This is its second term. But you may be a critic, you may be a supporter. What we can say is that this has been an action packed and very eventful 100 days. To understand the ideological direction of the Modi government, to unravel some of the policy moves, the political decisions, legislations that have been effected in these 100 days, I'm joined by a very distinguished guest. Shakti Sinha is director of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. A retired bureaucrat, he served as private secretary to the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, as well as a joint secretary in Mr. Vajpayee's office. He has a view which is both that of an insider as well as an outsider. Thank you so much, Shakti ji, for joining us.
Welcome.
100 days in the second term. How would you judge the direction of this government, and in what ways do you think Modi 2.0 is different from the Narendra Modi government of between 2014 and 19?
I think the first thing that comes across very clearly, Prashant, at this moment is that this is a government now which seems to have prepared its agenda well. It has not come to office and then tried to find its way. I think the previous 5 years has gone into learning a lot, into understanding the situation better. And the fact that you have come back with such a large mandate, unprecedented mandate, does give you the confidence that yes, this is what is now acceptable. And I think with that very clearly in view, the idea of India that they have, they are now going about it, implementing it. Now, it's not an idea of India which is very out of the extraordinary or something. It's an idea which has been thought through over last decades and decades. So in that sense, it is a culmination of decades of thinking about India and going forward on it, which is why you're able to see such decisive steps being taken at such short notice. And yet, these are not steps which are not been in the realm of ideas before. It didn't drop from the skies. So in that sense, I think this is what is coming across very, very clearly.
When you talk about the government pushing its idea of India, what I hear from you is that this is a government that's more committed to the ideological agenda that the party, as well as its ideological parent, the RSS, has believed in and espoused.
Right.
So do you see that the government now pushing core elements of that broader ideological project in the years to come as well?
You know, Prashant, most political parties say one thing and do another thing all over the world. I'm not blaming X, Y, Z. That is the standard norm of politics. Here, I think what you're seeing is that they are doing what they said they would do. Just because you and I thought they would not do it has not deterred them from going ahead with it. And that is, I think, the key difference is that they do believe in an ideology. I mean, if there is a party in that real sense today who's still left in power or out of power, its core support base remains with it, is the BJP. And therefore, this is an ideology that they are comfortable with. It has evolved over the years. It's not frozen in 1960 or leave alone Guru Golwalkar's notes of those days. It has evolved with the times and it has built on its experience in politics. So that is why the steps that you see being taken, Kashmir or other steps, has been steps which they've been arguing for a long time, but it has modified over time. So in that sense, one, they believe in the ideology. Two, they want to do what they said they would do.
The ideology that we're talking about, which can broadly be understood as Hindutva, is something that has given rise to certain concerns. Critics have looked at it as an ideological project that would lend itself to authoritarianism, that would lend itself to a certain kind of majoritarian rule, that would disempower minorities. Do you think that those are concerns that are legitimate and become more acute over the years to come?
I can understand the fears. I may not agree with the fears, but I can understand where they come from, because we have got used to a certain status quo, a certain way of doing things. And therefore, this seems so different from that it has disoriented not just his opponents, but many of his own supporters also, who also felt that, okay, they'll tinker a bit, some incremental change here, some there. And that's something we are comfortable with, a little more of the chalta hai kind of a thing. This is clearly very, very different, and which is why I can understand the tensions where it's coming from. But if you look at the concept of Hindutva, again, it's an evolving concept from what Savarkar, who had nothing to do with the RSS, said, to what the RSS developed, to what the Jansangh did, and the affiliates and now the BJP is an evolving consensus, an evolving broader idea. Earlier, the assumption was is limited power for the upper caste only. That should be completely demolished. The idea now is much greater. It encompasses people of different castes, up and down. And ultimately, as it goes along, when you take steps, it's basically meant to drive you towards an idea of India, which is important, with your other affiliations being there, but secondary to the idea of India. So it's not that you're expected to give up your religious beliefs or other things. No, absolutely no. But your first primary loyalty should be to the homeland, to the motherland, as they say. And that is what I think makes people nervous. But if you look at the width of the coalition that has built up, this is not a narrow coterie operating now. It's a very big party. It has its own tensions, as you can see in the government formation in Karnataka as an example. So it's not a perfect, what should I say, made to order kind of a party. No, it's not that. It is work in progress all the time. And when you have this broad coalition, I cannot see any party becoming authoritarian. You may become more decisive. You may have a certain centralization of powers, which I can understand. I may not fully agree with everything that you say. If you centralize, certain things cannot be centralized. But I can understand the fears coming from that, the fact, oh, but if I go back to history and I read a lot of history, I look at decision making in the 50s, the late 60s, very, very centralized. So it's not that we should be fearful of centralization by itself. If centralization is accompanied by authoritarianism, then obviously it is a scary phenomena. But as I said, the width of support base is so much and the need to win elections is so much, I cannot really see a drift or a descent into authoritarianism or majority.
My final question on the ideological issue, and
Mhm.
then we'll move to
Yeah.
the specifics.
Hmm.
Is India becoming a Hindu Rashtra?
Depends on your, again, the trouble with social sciences is depends on where you're coming from. Depends on what you mean by the word Hindu. By the word Hindu, if you have certain gods in mind, then no. There is no effort to tell people whom to believe in, what rituals to follow, none whatsoever. But if Hindu means a larger, broader sense of acceptability, of seeing India as a land from the Himalayas to the seas, on the western side to the northeast, if you see that as larger India, then I think the word Hindu broadly applied. And the word Hindu, if you remember, historically comes from the word river Sindh. And because the Arabs couldn't say Sindh, it became Hind. And Hind, the people of India, Hindi, Hindavi, Hindu. Yes, in the broader sense, the Hindu ethos of India has to be accepted. But the Hindu ethos of India is not an India that believes in one system of worship, in one prophet or one God. You are free to believe, you are free not to believe. I don't think so there'll be any question of questioning people on their religious beliefs. That is sacred, sacrosanct to the individual. But your communal loyalties, and I'm using the word communal in the good sense of the larger community, your communal values, your communal discipline, your communal life, that has to work as accommodation and adjustment with each other in that sense.
Let me get to the specifics. The biggest and the most significant decision taken by this government in the first 100 days was Kashmir. Changing the constitutional status of Kashmir, ending its special status, bifurcating it, reducing it to a union territory. Where, in your opinion, did this decision come from? And how do you assess the implications of this decision and how the government has dealt with it?
If you go back to the accession of Kashmir and the period immediately afterwards, the accession post the signature of the king, the Maharaja Hari Singh, after that things kept changing. And I think in that sense, the government of the day, Nehru's government, tried to say that, okay, Sheikh Abdullah is popularly, let him run the place. But by 53, they realized that things were not going the way they had envisaged Kashmir. 370 was consciously put as a temporary provision. Assumption was one Kashmir has its own constitution, assembly finishes its work, Kashmir will have a common constitution with India. And in fact, Kashmir constitution adoption itself then told you that no, now 370 is running into trouble. Over the years, successive governments have tried every way of dealing with Kashmir, from accommodation to pumping in money, to dismissing governments, putting Sheikh Abdullah in jail for a decade and a half. So everybody has tried different ways to resolve the unresolved question of 1947-48 Kashmir question. And the final conclusion reached was that 370, and as we later discovered 35A, which till 2 years ago nobody had heard of. finally came up that this is now the stumbling block. And therefore, if you want Kashmir to become an integral part of India, which we keep saying Akhand, Atut Ang hai Bharat ka, so it cannot be broken out of India, then keeping it separate with its own flag, with its own constitution, with the ability to say no to, say, RTI, no to the 377 judgments and the subsequent amendment in the law, that definitely allowed a small portion of the Kashmiri elite, the valley elite alone, to dominate proceedings, to in that sense become a rent-seeking class, surviving on instability and insecurity in Kashmir. We have lost 40,000 people to terrorism. An entire community of 500,000 was chased out of the valley, killed, raped, chased out of the valley. If you could tolerate all that and so long, I think it had to end. And the only way you could have ended it was to change the facts as they existed. Now, these are not facts on the ground as if you're conquering territory or ceding territory or doing this. No, this is the fact that you allowed this Kashmiri elite, only of the valley, and elite, that too, not the others, into hijacking the process, and that strings had to be cut.
But in the process of trying to integrate Kashmir
Right.
through this method, have we compromised on democracy and democratic rights and civil liberties?
Okay, certain moments of time, I will not use the compromise. I mean, as I read somewhere today, if Kashmir cannot live with 30 days of internet, the Kashmiri Pandits don't have lived for 30 years without a home. So you have to balance it out. One, if you look at the, other than the districts of the valley, the southern districts, not even the northern districts of the valley. If you look at Jammu, look at the Muslim parts of Jammu, look at Ladakh, you can see there's a large variety of people who are not at all involved in this insecurity business of Kashmir. And therefore, you have to be just to them also. Yes, there have been restrictions. They have been gradually eased. Some of it has been eased, but people are being told not to listen to the government. So don't open shops, don't go out. Open shop for 1 hour only. The fact that nobody has died. The only people who have died were a truck driver who villagers stoned thinking he's helping the security forces, and a shopkeeper who kept his shop open. I mean, people have not died. Hopefully, more and more with time, more and more restrictions will be lifted. And what should I say? Things will become much better. But a short-term cost in terms of not really losing your rights, but keeping them in suspended. I mean, the right to what? The right to move around or cell phones, etc. People are moving around, people are coming out, people are going in. There are restrictions on it, but it's not that it's just in a clampdown or that they are in detention or something.
Let me move to the other big issue that's confronted the government in these 100 days, the economy. The GDP is growing at 5% in the first quarter of this fiscal year. Consumption seems to be down across sectors. Auto is a big example. There are real concerns that the economy is now facing a crisis, and the government does not seem to have a plan besides some tinkering here and there. How concerned are you about the economy, and what's the way forward?
One, of course, post the 2008 crisis, I mean, the entire fundamentals of economics as taught in colleges has gone for a toss. Policymakers have used every possible, just not in India, all over the world, have used every kind of instruments which didn't exist in the past to try to sort out things. Obviously, our economic models have run up against a wall now. In the country and outside the country, most countries will be very happy to go at 5%, but that's not a solution. When I'm a poor country, I obviously want to grow faster. But the fact is that you are against massive global headwinds. You are not able to export yourself out of trouble. Even when our export figures remain the same, the values have fallen, so export earnings are falling. So this is a real challenge before us. Agricultural transformation is not yet complete. It's still in its phase. Our consumption model was based on a growing middle class, which beyond a point cannot sustain itself. How many cars will you buy? How many houses will you buy? People overbought their houses and therefore housing sector ran into trouble is another matter altogether. And therefore, and poor finance minister was wrongly pillared for saying that young generation is not buying cars. Reality is, if you do a good cost benefit analysis of using a Ola or Uber and owning a car, Ola Uber makes much more sense. I mean, I would hazard a guess that if there are 1 lakh Ola Uber on the streets of Delhi, there are 10 lakh cars on the streets of Delhi. Now, obviously, the manufacturers will be hit. Because of your lax financing in the early part of the decade, you have built up this massive NPAs everywhere, non-performing assets. So banks do not have the headway to lend money. Companies do not have the ability to take risks. When all this is working, I think it's very, very tough to find solutions. Governments have taken a number of steps, and I'm sure they're going to take much more steps to get this going. Because I think this problem is not just cyclical, it's a combination of cyclical and structural. So there are no short-term solutions. We'll certainly change things now.
Thank you so much for such an insightful and thoughtful conversation. Please join us for the next edition of The Big Picture next week. Thank you.